So I want to dive into a little bit of what we're going to go over today, and then what I'll be working with you guys on over the next few months. And then, as mentioned, my colleagues will also have some things to share. So here are the four of us. So from left on the screen, Trinna Leong is based in Malaysia. We're four of the dozen or so teaching fellows for Google News Lab from around the globe. We have colleagues in other places as well, but I wanted to try to span the globe for this conversation, and also let you all know that if you would like any training for your newsrooms based at home, we are happy to do that. And we have colleagues all over the globe who can do that as well. So for example, we just had a new fellow just join us in Kenya, and we have folks in different places. Second from left is José Heinz, who's based in Argentina. Myself, third from the left, and then Loes Witschge is based in the Netherlands. And we've all been here for different amounts of time. I think Trina might have been doing this work the longest, but each of us comes from a newsroom background doing different things. So it's important, as Thanos mentioned, to share that we're each journalists. We do consider ourselves still journalists. We understand the needs of what you're working with on the ground, and it's our job in this role as teaching fellows to help with tools and training and give you what you need to help do your jobs better and help do them easier. A little bit about our work. So as mentioned, we're part of the Google News Lab, which is part of the Google News Initiative, and that's Google's effort to build a stronger future for journalism. The role of the teaching fellow focuses on the first of the three E's here, as mentioned. So that's elevate and strengthen quality journalism. And the other areas of focus for the G&I are evolving business models through programs such as Subscribe with Google, and empowering news organizations through tech innovation. And that's mainly achieved through our regional innovation challenges, which you may be familiar with, as well as our development of tools for journalists. One of the tools that a couple of us are going to mention today is called Pinpoint, and that's one of our newer tools. And so that's been really gratifying to see how much the feedback from journalists has helped create the tool and then develop and refine it along the way. It continues to be developed, and there are a lot of interesting things coming for it. It's the focus of one of our upcoming sessions, which I'll share with you in just a minute. But I'll mention that one in particular, that work is a piece of the Google News Initiative as well. And so for today, here's where we're headed. We're going around the globe. We'll first hear from Loes, we'll hear from Trina, we'll hear from Jose, and then I'll speak. And what we want to do is share some great case studies from our regions where journalists have used Google tools and they've used really interesting technology to help them do their jobs, whether that's through research, story ideation, or storytelling, such as visualization tools. My hope is that this provides a little bit of the landscape of what's possible, and that it might inspire some new ideas for you as well. So this isn't so much a hands-on training and a how-to. Those will be our next three sessions, but this is more of a broad sort of what other folks are doing around the globe, and hope that that sparks some ideas for you. So I hope that you're able to walk away today with something that you want to try right away, and then also maybe something to sort of chew on and think about for future. How could I use this? Would this thing work in my role? That sort of thing. And then at the very end, we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A. And I think it's important to mention that it's nicer for all of us, you all included, and those of us who are presenting, if you ask us questions as we go. That it's always better when it feels like a conversation and when it feels interactive. So please don't hesitate to interrupt with your thoughts and questions. And we'll all be looking at the chat and the Q&A, and I know Thanos is doing the same, and he'll let us know. So also, if we're going too fast, or if there's something that you want to share, then do let us know that as well.
Excellent.
Here's what's coming up. So there are 4 sessions for your group. Today is the only one with all of us. The next 3 will be just me. So I want to thank my colleagues for joining me today for this kickoff. And so these are the second Wednesdays of the month through October. So next month, I'll go into Pinpoint in depth with you all. And that's the one I just mentioned. The following month, we'll do Google Trends. And then finally, on the October date, I'll show you some great environmental journalism trends, including Google's new time-lapse feature, which is part of Google Earth. It's a new update. It's the first update to Google Earth in about 4 years, first major update. It's very, very cool. So we'll get our hands dirty. We'll play with those things. Again, I hope you'll get some inspiration and also some really actionable steps that you can take right away. That's always the goal. So that's where we're headed. Finally, I want to share this URL. So we will drop URLs in the chat today as we go, but I want to emphasize that this is the one to hang on to. So g.co/news training. And this is where you can find trainings on everything we'll talk about today and then some. And so I know that it's hard to be talked at, and so I appreciate your attention today, but I also know it's much easier to learn when you're doing it yourself. Most people are experiential learners. So this is the site where you can go grab a training. It's all free. It's easy to use. They're usually 5 to 10 minutes a piece. They're very bite-sized, and then you can build as you go along. So it's a nice place to brush up your skills and feel free to share with your colleagues. I'm going to go back a couple of slides to our pictures again, because I want to just emphasize this email address, which I should have called out on this page. So newslabsupport@google.com. I'll share this again at the end, but that is how you could reach any of us. And also, again, if you would like a training on anything we talk about today, or something else that you notice on our training site, or simply have an idea or a project you might like to work on together, this is the catch-all email to get any of the folks working at GNI. So newslabsupport@google.com. That said, moving back around the globe, and let's move it to Loes. And so I'm going to stop my screen share and she's going to do it. And this will be the only time that we make that change today, so that she can demo some of that great stuff from Europe. And she'll showcase how different newsrooms have covered elections, recent elections in Europe using Google tools. So that said, I will stop talking and I will stop my share and let you take over, Loes.
Thanks so much, Mary. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. And as discussed before, the moment I do that, I will immediately stop seeing the chat. So just so you know, I've given my colleagues, Mary, especially, permission to interrupt me with her questions. So please feel free to ask your questions in the chat. And then Mary will relay them to me, as right now I can no longer see the chat. So Mary, can you just confirm that you can see my first slide, which is also covering elections in Europe with Google Tools?
Confirmed, looks great.
Perfect. All right. Welcome, everyone. So just to quickly introduce myself, I'm the Northern Europe Teaching Fellow. As Mary said, one of about a dozen teaching fellows. And I train journalists and journalism students in the Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland, Northern Europe. Today, I'm not going to talk just about Northern Europe. I'm going to talk about Europe in general. I am going to talk about, so let's see, oh yes, you are seeing my new slides. I have chosen to focus on elections. Why? There's no shortage of elections in Europe. So the list that you see here, this is just a selection of some of the elections that we've seen and will see in 2021. So we've had the Dutch ones, we've had the London mayoral elections, which were quite big, Madrid regional, and we also have some big ones coming up, including Russian parliamentary and German general, which is going to be a very, very big election for my continent. And what we see every time, you know, these elections take place is that a lot of newsrooms start using the tools that we train in, whether we've trained them in it or not. They start using these tools and make some really cool kind of multimedia productions with them. So what I will do is share a few examples that will hopefully give you some ideas on how you can enhance election coverage. This can help, for example, you know, you can take European examples and apply them to, for example, the mayoral election in New York, which will happen later this year, or midterm elections next year in the United States, which are still some way off. But it's always good to start early. And so the tools I'm going to be talking about specifically are Trends, which Mary will train you on later on, which is a very useful tool for journalists, Flourish, and Google Earth Studio. And so just to begin with Google Trends, again, Mary will give you in-depth training on this, but for those of you who are not familiar at this point, Google Trends is a tool that shows search interest historically and practically in real time. And so journalists can use this data to find out what questions people have about certain topics, for example, elections or politicians. What topics are trending at any given time, what topics people are searching in combination with other topics. So this is really a very useful tool for journalists for inspiration, for interview questions, for angles, or you can use data to create cool data viz. And so this first example that I have here, and I'll give you a quick demo, is an example of just that. It's a cool data production made with trends data. This data viz was made in the run-up to presidential elections in France in 2017. And it was created by We Do Data, which is a French data journalism outfit. What it shows basically is which kind of interesting election topics or political topics, people are searching in combination with the presidential candidates in the run-up, so every day ahead of the election. So now we've set it to 8th May, and we are looking at Macron, and you see that he's most associated. Let me just quickly set this to English, might be a bit easier to follow. There we go. We see that retirement is a main topic. On May 7th, it's the same. Actually, when you go through this evolution, you see that Macron is highly associated on search with retirement. For Le Pen, it's a slightly different story. Also, retirement always scores high. We can see evolution over time, which is what I'm clicking on now. Maybe unsurprisingly, immigration is always higher in association with Le Pen than with Macron. But I think, so this data visualization is interesting because it shows using this trends data, which is very honest. It's not, you know, people when they search on Google, they don't Google desirable things, like they might give desirable answers to pollsters. But what is interesting, I think, in this graph is that even for Le Pen, retirement is usually the top issue. So again, this gives you a very kind of honest view of what people are searching for in relation to certain presidential candidates. Could be interesting for the politicians themselves, definitely interesting for journalists and your audiences. So just to go back here. Such data visualizations are cool. Not every reporter or every newsroom has the resources to make them. Another way that you can use trends data is to get ideas for relevant interview questions. And so this is a screenshot of a popular breakfast TV show in the Netherlands. It's called Good Morning Netherlands, Goedemorgen Nederland. And in the run-up to our national elections, which took place in March, they invited one party leader to their show every single morning. So for 17 days straight, we had a lot of parties participating this year. And one recurring item of those shows with those party leaders was that they would confront them with some of the most asked questions on Google about them and ask them for the answer, of course. So these questions ranged from what does your party stand for to why are other parties scared of you? I think one politician was even asked for his salary. It got even more direct. One far-right politician was asked the question on air, are you an anti-Semite? Because that was a popular question asked on Google. So I think this was a very interesting way of confronting party leaders with quite direct questions, and the presenter could kind of, because it is a morning show that is slightly more lighthearted, she could still ask these very direct questions and hide behind, you know, the people on Google are searching for these answers. Can you please give it to them? The questions, by the way, were provided to the show's producers by the Google News Lab Trends team. So this data was pulled specifically for them. If this is something that you would like to request, this kind of bespoke trends data, you can email them at this email address. That's newslabtrends@google.com. And Mary will explain much more about this at a later stage, I'm sure. And so one final example of trends use in election coverage. Trends data can also be a fact in a story or a piece of evidence to build a case. This is a screenshot taken from the Danish publication Zetland. I hope I pronounced this correctly. I actually don't speak Danish. It specializes in long form and in-depth reporting, and it publishes only a few articles a day. So it's really this in-depth view of what's happening in Denmark and in the world. And this 2019 piece is called Will Fake News Become a Huge Threat During the Parliamentary Elections? Here are 4 reasons to calm down. And so I wanted to show this example because it simply uses a trends graph to illustrate how interest among internet users in fake news has spiked since Donald Trump got elected. So this is search interest on Google in Denmark. And you see here, January 1st, 2016, here's 2018. So this would be late 2016 when it starts spiking. So again, it's using trends just to make one point. You know, there is a lot of search interest in fake news since the election. And then he starts building his case. The journalist starts building his case about why he's not too worried that regardless, fake news will influence the elections in Denmark too much. So again, that's just 3 examples of how you can use trends data. You can make cool data viz. You can use it as a piece of evidence, or it can, you know, be inspiration for interview questions. There are more ways, but I'm going to move on now to another fantastic tool to enhance election coverage, which is Flourish. Flourish, I should point out, is not a Google tool. It was developed by the UK-based Kiln Studios. However, GNI has partnered with Flourish to make some premium features freely available to newsrooms. And so that's why me and the other teaching fellows, we train quite a bit in Flourish also, because it has so many options for creating really professional looking data viz, which can be completely customized, with your own data, with your publication house style, etc. Flourish works with templates. You can see here on the slides, kind of a scroll down of the website, all these templates you can customize completely, and it ranges from really quite simple, a photo slider or a countdown, which is quite a new one, I believe, to more complex ones like animated line charts and Sankey diagrams. And so again, I've picked a few examples of how European media have used Flourish to create data viz about elections. I'm going to start with another Dutch example. This is a projection map made by Pointer. Pointer is a Dutch data journalism TV show. And they created this map, let's see, in the run-up to European elections last year, 23rd May 2020. And what we can see if we scroll down, this is the map I wanted to show. So this is actually a combination of Google Trends data visualized with Flourish, because it shows search interest in different parties compared between the different provinces in the Netherlands. And so here from this drop down, you can select the party name, and then you'll see the darker basically the province is, the more search interest, relative search interest there is. So let's take a look at CDA. These are the Christian Democrats. They tend to be more popular in rural areas, which we can see here. These are kind of the more rural provinces of the Netherlands. This is the province where Amsterdam is, so you see that it's a lighter shade. And then another one, and so you can really see the difference when you compare different parties. So this is GroenLinks, it's the Progressive Green Party. And you see immediately, so this Utrecht is quite an urban province. Northern Holland, which contains Amsterdam, is darker. And then also, this is quite interesting. This is the province of Groningen, which is not very densely populated, but has a big university town. So you tend to see kind of left, you see more search interest for more left-wing parties in the province of Groningen. So I think this is an interesting illustration just to show you that even in a teeny tiny country like the Netherlands, there still is this kind of rural and urban divide and interest for political parties. One more example, which I thought was also really striking before I move on. Forum for Democracy is a newer, really right-wing party. Very dark all over because there was a lot of search interest all over the country. I should add at this point that search interest does not, equate voting intention. This can also be because there were potentially a lot of gaps, or because the party was quite new, there was a lot of interest from all over. So again, that's one way to use Flourish. Moving on, this is taken from Spanish newspaper El Mundo, and they use the survey template for this visualization. This is actually not necessarily a piece of election coverage, but I wanted to show it anyway because I think it's a really nice use of a Flourish template, and it's actually very well suited for election coverage. So let me just go to the site. Let's translate this into English with Google Translate. All right, this is how the 270 members of the government of Spain have been since 1979. Basically, all the cabinet members since modern democracy has existed in Spain. It shows the makeup of these governments, and it does so again using a survey template. So we can click from one to another, and then again you see the makeup. There are some interesting bits here. It says 162 of the cabinet members have been men, 55 women. So maybe not as surprising that women have been in a minority since 1979. If we move on, though, we get to more interesting bits. So here, for example, there's one party, UCD, which has supplied quite a few ministers, but only one woman in all that time since 1979. So that's quite an interesting thing that's very striking from this visualization. You can see it at a glance. And then another interesting fact in here is that actually more than half of all these cabinet ministers have studied law, which I think is very interesting. And I wonder what that's like in other countries. So if you want to be a cabinet member in Spain, I suppose your safest bet is to study law. So again, that was the survey template. And as you can see with Flourish, it's really quite diverse from kind of the more traditional, map charts, line charts to this more kind of innovative or different survey chart. And then this one is the cards template. And this one is actually always a popular one in the run-up to elections. You can use this template to introduce candidates, because literally what you do is you create cards, put some photos on it, put some key facts or statistics about these people, and then you can allow readers to filter candidates by a certain value or color the cards by a certain value, which is exactly what this Austrian publication has done. This is their presentation of the new government, which took office in 2020, which was a turquoise green coalition. The first one, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm not an expert on Austrian politics, I should add. And so you can see here a Flourish data visualization. So it's literally just cards with photos of the cabinet members, their name, their age, their party, where they were born, and what they are a minister of. Again, really simple, but very effective. Much nicer than putting a list, you know, just in text in an article. Now people can kind of scroll along, see the faces of their new government. So these are just a couple of examples. It was quite difficult for me to make the selection, because publications really use Flourish quite a bit in the run-up to and after elections. Flourish has actually put together a blog post with 10 ways to visualize election data. So if you would like some more inspiration for this, either one of my colleagues will now drop a link in the chat to this blog post, or I will do it after I stop talking. So this is basically a blog post by Flourish with 10 ways that you can use their templates to create election visuals. So hopefully there's something interesting for you there that you can actually use next time you're covering elections. Finally, one example of how the Spanish newspaper El Confidencial used Google Earth Studio to cover the results of Madrid's regional elections, which took place this year. Google Earth Studio is an animation tool for Google Earth satellite and 3D imagery, and it allows you to export high-quality images that you can edit into a video yourself. It's a free tool for journalists, so what you can do basically is create images where you fly from one place to another, zoom in on a location, circle around a certain location in 3D. You will export it as a JPEG sequence, and then you can convert it in your editing software and make it part of your video, your news video. And so El Confidencial used it to fly from one party HQ to another, then features speeches by party leaders either celebrating or conceding defeat. So I'm just going to play it. Sound is off, there's sound under it, but if I play the sound now, it will just be people speaking. So now we fly to the building of one of the parties, PP, and then we'll get a little video with the party leaders speaking. They look happy. I imagine they have done quite well in this election, but I'm not sure because I didn't really follow the Madrid regional elections. Let's see, let's wait until they're done speaking, and then we'll fly to the next location. And I think that this format, so this use of Google Earth Studio is really nice if you're covering a story that is local. I think doing this for an entire country, flying from one place in a country to another place might be difficult. But again, this could be nice, for example, for mayoral elections or for stories that are, you know, located in one place where you can fly, like we see now, from one place to another quite quickly. All right, so that's all I wanted to demo. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, I think, by clicking on this button. If there are any questions, please let me know. Feel free to, yes, Thanos.
No, amazing. All these are fascinating tools. And it's just, I think the challenge is to get the journalists, foreign journalists or American correspondents to familiarize with themselves with these tools. And this is really important what we're doing now, and also the next training sessions we have already scheduled, Mary. Anne, Martin, Rais, Sima, Samsun, and all others, feel free, raise your hand if you have questions or put your question on the chat. You are allowed to talk and to join the conversation. One quick question from me, Loes. Is these tools that you presented for, you know, presidential elections is specifically for Europe, or it can apply in any country outside of Europe or in any region?
So these tools are available for, you know, anyone, anywhere. You can apply them to any election, obviously. Do you mean specifically the presidential elections in France?
Yes, this is what I was talking about.
Yeah. So the website, this example only exists for France because it was made by a French data journalism outfit. They use trends data. So this kind of data will exist for any country. My expectation is that, again, they worked with the trends team, the email address of which I shared, in order to get this granular data. A lot of stuff you can get from the dashboard, which I'm sure Mary will explain in early September. But if you need more kind of in-depth information, you can contact the trends team and they can help you. And yes, this is available for every country. Yeah,
I'm sure these insights that someone can get related to elections, related to the searches of what are the major topics for different parties or different candidates. I think these are valuable insights, not only for journalists, but also for political campaigners, right?
Absolutely. And you often see like surprising things. You often think that, again, with the example of Le Pen, that she would just be associated with immigration or the climate or the euro, but actually there are higher numbers for retirement, which a lot of people are worried about in France, or for education. So that's always, you always get some surprising elements there. So I think, again, trends is great to use during elections.
Yeah. Mary, what's next?
Sure. I actually have one additional question for Loes, which I think is a little bit connected to the first thing you were saying there, Thanos, which is, Loes, of the different visualizations you showed in Flourish, many of which are really sophisticated, which would you say, do you think is the most accessible for people to maybe get a start with? Maybe it's one that you showed or one that you didn't show.
Let's see. I need to quickly go back to, so I think the cards templates, I mean, all of them are actually quite easy to get the hang of. Personally, I think the projection maps, they take a little bit of practice because they work with so-called GeoJSON files. So you'll need to upload the edges of a geography, which is, you can learn it, but you'll need to spend like an hour coming to grips with it. The others, I think the survey template, quite easy. The cards template, quite easy. All of the line charts, quite self-explanatory. I think it's also worth adding that actually Flourish itself is a great support site. It also has a YouTube channel, which includes tea breaks, which are 30-minute YouTube videos where they take you through each of the templates step by step, or many of the templates. And so if you want to really learn these projection maps, I can really recommend. Or you contact us, the teaching fellows, and we're happy to set up a training with you. Or you take a look at the tea breaks and you try around at home.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, let's move from Europe to Asia. Loes, if you wouldn't mind dropping in the Flourish YouTube channel into the chat as we move to Trina, that would be amazing. For sure. Awesome. And let me start screen sharing again. Exactly right. Where is it? Here it is. Let me actually move forward for you. Great. Okay. So Trina, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, say a little bit about your background, and then show us some great stuff from Asia.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary. So hi, everyone. My name is Trina. I am the Southeast Asia Teaching Fellow at NewsLab. Before this, what I call my past life, I was a Malaysia correspondent for almost a decade, covering the very exciting triple beat of politics, economy, and general news. So I had the opportunity to cover crucial elections, the very famous multi-billion-dollar financial 1MDB scandal, air disasters, and so forth. So I understand and know the thrill and challenge of being a correspondent for foreign news outlets. I used to work for Reuters and the Straits Times. So that also meant that, I was constantly working in small boroughs, and I had to know how to cover everything and anything. So it was an incredibly valuable experience, as it taught me to be versatile and quick to changing environments. So I had to acquire different skill sets because I didn't have my own photographer or cameraman. I'm basically a one-woman show. And I think most of you can probably relate to this as you juggle being a foreign correspondent in the US for your newsroom. So right now, what I actually do in Southeast Asia is that I cover this region of about 10 countries that's very culturally different in both languages and the way people operate. So it has been a really interesting journey to see how different newsrooms report their stories in their own country. So today I'll cover a few of the commonly used Google-related tools that newsrooms across APAC use for the reportage. Just FYI, I'm just one of the 4 fellows within APAC. I have colleagues in Australia, Seoul, and also Tokyo. So next is the first example that I wanted to show. It's on Google Trends. It's the story from 2 stories from Australia. First, it's a very simple story. It's just basically, like if you're it's a nice quirky story, I thought. And if you're wondering, what kind of stories you can do out of trends, it's really anything is possible. Loes has already shown you what can be done with elections, but if you're thinking of doing like spot stories or even feature stories, and the first example is actually just to show a nice quirky one to show that, what's the one word that Australians can't really spell right? And the answer is actually diarrhea. And the second story is a health story whereby this reporter wanted to do a story on ADHD, and it's a long feature story, and part of it actually encompassed the use of Google Trends, where she actually took trends data to show how people are searching about searching about word terms or words related to ADHD. And the next one is also from Australia, and that would be and it's actually a story from ABC. So they did this story recently, simply because of the fact that there's been a lot of vaccine hesitation. Mary, we got to go back. Wait, no. Yeah, this one. Yes, this is the one. So it's basically a story about whether or not vaccines are safe and what are side effects. So they actually compiled questions based on what people were searching for on Google Trends to identify 5 questions that they felt were crucial enough to answer. And Mary would drop in the link so you can read the full article for free. So I thought this was another interesting way to actually just do a story, especially at this time when countries are ramping up vaccination. So what are the stories? If you run out of ideas, what are the pandemic related stories can you do? This is, I thought, a very good example. And next up is from India. We have 2 different stories from India. So one is that 1 year on after the pandemic hit, are people really still searching about COVID-19? Are they still curious about it, or even are they even finding out more information about infection rates and so forth? And they find that 1 year on, actually people are losing interest in the pandemic, even though it was raging all over India like crazy a few months ago. So people were actually trying to move on with their lives. So you could see there was a massive drop in search interest in COVID-19 as compared to one year before, back in 2020. And this other story on the right actually just shows that, well, people are not looking at, COVID-related numbers, but they were actually looking at other things because many people were still stuck at home in India. So what they were doing is they were looking at, work from home jobs, e-courses that they could take, and so forth. And the next one that I want to show also from trends is from Southeast Asia, in Indonesia and the Philippines. So on the left, I can translate for you. It basically, so there's this entryway of 5G into several Southeast Asian countries this year. So one of the things that upon the announcement in Indonesia that they're bringing 5G into the country is that, there's been a spike on Google search, which was reflected in the trends data. People were actually looking for mobile phones that have 5G ability. or they were looking for recommendations for new mobile phones that supports 5G, or even cheap mobile phones that supports 5G for under 2 million rupiah. The story on the right actually is from the Philippines, and it's just as direct as the headline says, that Filipinos are Googling unapproved COVID-19 treatments instead of vaccine. And they started off the story with this simple chart that they did. It's quite obvious this chart was done using Google spreadsheet, and they just took the trends data and just did this chart up for a quick sports story. And next is I will move on to Google Earth and My Maps. So in Japan, there's been a wider use of Google Earth, especially this year among different Japanese newsrooms. As this was especially in commemoration of the 10th anniversary of the 2011 tsunami, which occurred in March. So the story, the one on the left, which if you play, you can actually see it's a Google Earth use of the newsroom, basically just there. Okay, so you can see it's a nice pan and to show different locations. So it's a special project that was done by this publication called Iwate Nippo, and you can see how they use Google Earth, and it's called Memories of Stones. So the project would feature memorial stone or monuments which record disasters and tsunamis in a damaged area that occurred in 2011. And so Google News Initiative actually supported the newsroom for utilizing Earth maps and also YouTube for this reporting project. So Iwate Nippo won an award for this project that they did from the Association of Media and Digital in Japan. Well, the one on the right, it's actually the use of Google My Maps. It's done by this newspaper called Yomiuri Shimbun, and they use My Maps also to commemorate the Great East Japan earthquake by actually highlighting the different locations of the incidents, places that were affected. And next you would see okay, next is an example of Google Earth use from South Korea. So this is actually a story done by a very popular and famous investigative news outlet. And they did this story to illustrate the 82 US military bases located in South Korea. So the whole intention of the story was basically to highlight the return of some of these military bases, especially those that has been closed or abandoned, back to the South Korean government. So they actually use Google Earth, this template called projects, so you can find when you open your Google Earth web. So they use this, and Mary can drop links to that, and you can see how they actually just tried, they took pictures and they just did location landmark point marks at each different of the military base located across the country. And now I'll move on to Flourish. So for Flourish, as Loes mentioned earlier, there's been a wide use of Flourish, even across, especially across Southeast Asia for election-related stories. So I've seen this so far happening in Indonesia and Malaysia, and also in the Philippines, whereby Flourish use for coverage of the pandemic and also elections has been quite common. So this story was done last year when a crucial state election was held in the midst of a pandemic in Malaysia. So the local publications that we've seen, who use Flourish to cover elections, they've actually generally just used cards, which is the template that you see on the left, to highlight the different parties contesting and how many seats they contested and how many was won. And they also like to use Parliament seat chart because it's very, very easy to use, and it actually just demonstrates to you how many seats were won and lost by different factions. And you can also, there are also other templates like table, bar chart, race, projection map to showcase the results. And there is a blog like Flourish, which actually have all these recommendations, including the one that Loes mentioned earlier on, election reporting. So you can actually browse through the Flourish blog for different tips that you can actually pick up on how to better use Flourish. And they also issue out updates. So you can get regular updates from Flourish whenever they have changes to the templates or new templates are added. So the other example of the use of Flourish that we see quite a good use of within Asia is whenever a government announces a budget, their budget, right? So the annual budget announcement is very data driven. It's a lot of numbers. So newsrooms tend to break down the announcement into this digestible bites by taking out the most important takeaways, but instead of putting them all in text, right? So many of these newsrooms actually pack these takeaways into Flourish bar charts or the table or even hierarchy templates. And from the hierarchy templates, I think one of the most common ones that you would see is the tree map design, and they would also unpack circles and to this visualization, which is similar to what Loes showed you earlier, all these moving little circles to divide the budget announcement into key categories. So the one on the right is from Indonesia, right? Because we see that, with COVID, there's been a wide use of Flourish by a lot of newsrooms to just basically deliver their daily data into, nice interactive tables. But one of the things that you can also do with Flourish is mapping, right? Which you can then, it requires, as Loes said, a bit of a use of knowledge of GeoJSON. But I thought this was a great, visualization that you could just look at and sort of understand the story, whereby they actually try to highlight to you where in Indonesia are the red zones, COVID red zones. And because Indonesia is a huge island country, there are hundreds of islands, so they had to. So the best way to do it, instead of listing it down table or in text, they just decided to do a map. And so you can see the different provinces, and the province, they divide the lines by provinces, and the provinces with the darker red would indicate a higher infection rate. And next on is also, this is the last example that I have. It's basically also by Indonesia, and I'll let Mary play this file before I continue talking. So if you enable the audio, you can actually listen.
Because I have my headphones in, I don't think I'm going to be able to play it for folks. I'm sorry, Trina.
Okay, so if you watch the link, what this actually does is it's a series that was done of investigative story that was done back in 2019 by this very huge news media outlet in Indonesia called Tirto, that looks at sexual assault cases on campus. So they did the interviews and they divided the stories according to 5 different universities that the team decided to focus on. And what you see is this format is actually the stories template. But within the stories template, what I thought that was quite interesting, which I didn't see done in many other newsrooms, is that they actually inserted audio as well. So you have a person narrating as the visualization is actually moving. And I provided also the link, the YouTube link, to actually teach you how to insert audio into data stories. And you can actually do this under the stories editor in Flourish. And that's it from me. I hope this provides a good idea of the different ways to use these tools in your reporting. And with that, I'll pass it on to Jose.
Great.
That was exciting. Thanks, Trina.
Thank you.
Thanos, anything from you or any questions from any guests before we move to Latin America?
I don't see any questions. Guys, you are all unmuted. If you want, you just either raise your hand or throw your question on the chat. I don't have any question on that personally. I think that it's a very important element, the way that it was presented.
Awesome. Great. Okay. So let me just move the slides forward here and let's move to Jose. And Jose, if you wouldn't mind, give us a start, tell us about your background and,
sure.
And then let us know about what's going on in your part of the world.
Great. Thank you, Mary. Hi, everyone. Well, my name is José Heinz. As Mary said, she presented me. I started at the GNI a couple of months ago, so I will say I'm just starting. I used to work in a newspaper from Cordoba, in a city in Argentina where I live. The newspaper was called La Voz del Interior. I used to cover culture news, I don't know, like music, movies, books, that kind of stuff. And of course, my main language is Spanish, but I think that I learned a little bit of English. Just I used to joke around that I learned a lot of English interviewing rock stars because they speak in a really in a really strange and curious ways. I just wanted to show you two examples about the use of Google tools from Latin America. The first one, as you can see in this slide, is a story published in Revista Crisis, that it's a magazine about politics and culture. It's a story written by a reporter named Gabriela Figueroa. She was working on a long story about a public hospital in Buenos Aires, Hospital de Moreno, that it was very close to collapse due to the second wave of coronavirus. This is from last April. So I spoke to her and she told me that the personnel was exhausted, the doctors couldn't help all the patients. It was a really tough situation. Perhaps Mary can share the link and you can translate it and read. It's a really amazing chronic about a devastating situation. So Gabriela needed to finish the story so it didn't get old, and the deadline was also very close for her. So she decided to use Pinpoint. It's a tool from the Journal Studio. If you want to check it out, you just need to go to journalstudio.google.com. And she decided to use Pinpoint because she needed to transcribe very fast all the conversations she had with different sources for the story, and she knew that there was really valuable material there. So she had also some documents that she needed to read. So the way she used Pinpoint is to upload all those materials, and she could finish it on time. And in the next slide, I will show you. Let's see. Yeah, we say it's advanced search through many documents because for those who never use Pinpoint, it's a really useful tool for any kind of journalism, but perhaps it's more helpful for those reporters who do investigation. It works with machine learning, and once you create your account, you can upload three different kind of files. You can upload text files, images, and audio, of course, and even handwritten notes. So Pinpoint scans these documents to translate it or to analyze it, the data with different filters. So that's the way it used the machine learning. For example, if you upload a bunch of documents, it can show you how many times a person is mentioned, or a city, or an organization. So it can be really helpful if you have a large amount of documents to read for an investigation. So you can upload all those files to Pinpoint, and it will scan them and analyze it for you, and it would help you to do, for example, those tasks that are really tough for a journalist, like transcribe interviews. Pinpoint, the main thing, I wanted to show you this example because Pinpoint started working in English, and now it works in a lot of languages, like Spanish, of course. So there are a few journalists that are starting using Pinpoint in Latin America. And that was the first example that I wanted to use to show to you. And in the next slide, we have the second one, that it's another example of a very useful and simple use of one of the templates of Flourish that It's from Politico. That's a site from Mexico. And Politico, it's a newsroom that had been on a GNI training provided by Juliana Fregoso, who is a colleague of us. She's also working in the GNI Live. In the GNI, she's a teaching fellow. And of course, as Trina and Lou said, there are some templates in Flourish that are a little bit more complicated than others, but this is really, really simple. It's a really cool use of the map, of the interactive map. In this case, this story is about the violence in different places in Mexico during the election day of the past June. So the reporter chooses a map of Mexico divided, of course, in the different states, and choose different colors to show the increase of violence. For example, green, as you can see, is places with no incidents, and yellow, orange, and red are for those who had several cases. And as you can see in the right part of this slide, if you move over the places, you put the mouse over the state, it provides information about those incidents. So it's easier for the reader or to understand the situation over a whole country, and it's a better use for just a list of information. So Flourish, as Luz and Trina said, it's a really cool tool for those, for example, who work as a freelance journalist or small newsrooms that don't have graphic designers or developers, and they want to visualize some information. So it's a really cool tool for those who are interested in showing interactive maps or those kind of stuff. So those were my two examples, Pinpoint and Flourish.
Thank you, Jose. That's so cool to see. And I love that you emphasize, I think it's a really important point, that these tools are great for people who are working in small newsrooms or who might be working as freelancers or by themselves, that you don't have to have a graphic design background to use these kinds of things. It takes a little bit of experimenting and working with it, but we have a lot of resources to help you do that as well.
And if I'm right,
next.
maybe the pinpoint will be one of the trainings that are coming.
Yes, I believe it's the next one that we're doing at first.
Right.
And it's a tool that you see a little bit of the potential that Jose has shared. I'll share a little bit more, and then we'll really dive into it. I've shared the link for folks if you want to sign up for Pinpoint. It's free for journalists to use. You just have to fill out a form. And the team that runs Pinpoint are based in Tel Aviv, and they have an internal goal of responding to requests for access within 24 hours, and they usually get to it even faster. They're very, very quick and good.
Before you proceed, Mary, I think Raz Rangarazan from India. Raz, you raised your hand during the presentation of Jose. If you hear us, or you just drop the question on the chat. Probably the second. Mary, let's go ahead.
Yes.
We were waiting.
I want to just confirm that I know we're at the hour, and I believe we had 75 minutes, but I don't want to go too far over if we should be stopping soon. So Thanos, just
No.
clarify.
Let's take our time. I think it's really, interesting and engaging. So, what's next?
Okay, it's me. I just want to re-present so I can grab my notes as well. So, and I'll introduce myself, which I should have done at the beginning, so apologies for that. I'm Mary Nahorniak. I'm the US-based teaching fellow, and I've been doing this for about 3 months. Before that, I was at USA Today for about a decade as director of audience. I see one of my former colleagues is on this call. Hi, Anne. And I've been in the business for just under 20 years. I also worked as the breaking news director at the Baltimore Sun. I worked at the Richmond Times-Dispatch as a copy editor, where I got my start. And I've also worked in Malaysia. I didn't know Trina then, but I wish I had, for a mobile internet company there, and for News Trust, which is a nonprofit focused on news literacy. And I'm so grateful for that experience, because that comes up all the time now as we've talked about misinformation around the globe. So that's a little bit about me. And I'll share a little bit more on each of the tools you've heard from my colleagues. So this is what we're looking at here is a Flourish visualization with data from Google Trends. This is something that is accessible to any of us to do, but I just love this. So this is top searched Academy Award Best Picture winners. And I like to watch it move through because it always makes me smile that the blue line at the top, and know it's a little bit hard to see, but that's Titanic. And I think it just speaks to the enduring legacy of Titanic in American culture and probably in other cultures as well. So I just enjoy that visualization. And so trends you heard a lot about, and we'll do a training on that. I believe that's our second one. We'll go look at the schedule when we're done here and just confirm all of that. So this is using trends to generate story ideas, which I love. So a lot of people are used to using trends to do keyword research, but I think this is what we saw from some of my other colleagues as well. And so this is like, I think it was Loes who mentioned that trends and searches are really honest, right? Like the types of things we type into Google are not the types of things that we might ask other people, but we're looking for that information online. And so my colleague, Madison Park, who works on trends, she said, what I really love about trends data is that it's big, immediate, and honest. You're not broadcasting something on a platform, you're searching for knowledge, and people usually don't lie when they're typing something in the search bar. So I think that's really important. And I think, Luz, you also mentioned this, that it's important to remember that search as it relates to elections doesn't always indicate a winner. But the way that I like to describe that is that it indicates curiosity, right? It's just, I want to know more about this person. I want to know more about this thing. That doesn't necessarily mean that I endorse it. So these are just some stories that come from Google Trends. And I want to also, let me call up these specifically. So I love this story from the Washington Post. They do a great job working with trends. And so this was, can Google searches predict where coronavirus cases will emerge? And so let me just scroll down to the tweet that sort of got this started. Where is it? There it is. So Dan Sinker is a great follow on Twitter. If you don't follow him, he's at Dan Sinker. He's not a Post reporter, but he is a journalist and a data viz person. And so he writes that he did a Google Trends search for loss of taste. Again, this is something that anybody can do. And he gasped at the chart shape because it directly matched what the coronavirus case chart looked like at the time. And so the Post reporter saw this and gave proper credit to Dan, who noticed it first, but also added a little bit of data. The Post, of course, has its own charts on COVID. And so they overlaid the case rate and wrote this story that simply showed people are typing loss of taste, loss of smell, one of the key symptoms of COVID that doesn't align with, other illnesses in the way that it does with this. And simply was able to say, here's a story, right? And there's one more from the Post that I'm also going to just call up here and make sure there we go. The Trump media era ends not with a wow, but with a whisper. And so this was a question of, just coming down to the graph here. So what can search of Donald Trump tell us about his popularity post-presidency? And so essentially what they learned through how many people are searching for him and using that data is that his popularity was connected. It was the same level that it was in 2015. So before he announced he was running for president, and then of course before he was president. So in using search data, how often is he being searched for? We can see that because he wasn't in the public eye, he also wasn't being searched for as much. So I think that's an important one. And here are just this, you see the trend story here on the left and a number of other just, where's the story? What can I learn about what people are looking for? One of the great sources to find those stories, of course, just looking for in your own mind, what questions do I have? What might people be looking for? But there's also a daily trends newsletter that I really like. It comes out in the early afternoon East Coast time. And I'll drop the link into the chat when I'm done talking, where you all can find that. It'll also be part of our trends training. And so those folks, the trends curators, are pulling out stuff that we might not think to pull, but every day they're saying, here are the trends. Yesterday was a great breakdown of some of the questions that people were asking and things they were searching for after the Euro win for Italy on Sunday, was it? And so it can be quite global as well. And I really like that one. So Jose mentioned this tool Pinpoint. So just to shift to this one a little bit, this is an example from the Center for Investigative Reporting, the Reveal podcast. And they use the tool Pinpoint, which searches through documents. And Jose mentioned that you can search through text documents, emails, and audio files. And so they had been doing an ongoing series about the spread of COVID in US immigration detention centers. And this story in particular focused on testing in ICE facilities. And so as they upload their documents into Pinpoint, They're then able to search for tests or testing, and Pinpoint actually has a great synonym search, which I'll show you when we do that training. And so they're able to pull together the story. So Pinpoint helps you see, what do I have here? And then what story will I write out of the data that I have? So it's perfect for sort of like FOIA dumps, right? You've gotten your information back, now what? Or documents that you collect yourself. This is a story from my former newsroom, USA Today. They've also been using Pinpoint for quite a while, I think a little over a year. And so this is what I would call a classic USA Today story, where it's, what is the state of X in all 50 states? And so they said, what is the state of COVID spread in nursing homes across the country? And so they collect all kinds of data through FOIA requests, through reporting, and analyze that data in Pinpoint, which helps them see not only, as I described in the previous slide, what story do I have here, but what do I not need to use? When you have thousands of documents, it can be really helpful to just set a bunch aside. My story is not in these documents. And so that's the unique use case of this one as well. And then we also had talked about maps. So I love this one just for a little bit more lighthearted example. This came out in the spring. It was right after I had moved from DC to California. And it's every place to eat and drink on the water within a 2.5-hour drive of DC. So those of you that are based in DC, if I were still there, I would bookmark this, and over the number of years, I'd probably try to go to all of them. But this was built using Google's My Maps, which is of all of the geo tools that we've showed you today, this one I think is the easiest to use. You can import addresses, or you can simply start to type them in and you can build your own map. So I've created a map of places I want to go visit in DC when I return for trips that I never got to see when I lived there. And finally, this is another DC based example, and I read the story with interest. So this from DCist, a publication there, and it uses just a single satellite image from Google Earth, which is available to anyone to use, and to use those photos as well with proper credit. And so this is a story about a tunnel borer that dug a 5-mile tunnel below the city. The borer's name is Chris, which is just amusing. And it shows that as the tunnel was finished, if you could see my mouse, I'm not sure if you can, but there's this hole where it shows this giant machine came up out of the ground as it was done doing its work. And I just thought that was so interesting to show. And there aren't very many ways to show something like that. So I just love that example, that you can grab a photo, a satellite image of something that you need to showcase, and you can include that in your story just like you would another image. Finally, this is the last one that I'll share, but this is an essay from SF Gate that this person just shares that he has spent a lot of time on Google Street View looking for weird things. And I know we've all read any number of stories about that. And it's just a culture story about who knows what's inside these maps and what does it mean that we're taking photography on the street every day. And this image always just gets me. So I think the theme I hope for today is what's possible, what's interesting, and where can you find some unique story ideas and then different ways to tell those stories. So let's move forward here. Okay, so we've been around the globe. We ended in the US. I mentioned the trainings at the beginning and throughout, and so I'll share this again with you all. So again, we'll be together the second Wednesdays of the month. We'll be at 1 p.m. Eastern, which I hope is a nicer time for you all than for those of you on the East Coast for 9 a.m. So next month on August 11th, we'll do Pinpoint. We'll go in depth on that. The following month, we'll do Google Trends. And then in October, I'll show some of those environmental journalism tools. And if there are others that you saw today that you're interested in, let us know, and I can include that in that training as well. So we did talk about some really interesting geo stuff. And so I'm going to pause on this slide again to share the email address. That's the second one down, newslabsupport@google.com. You can reach any of us through that email address and or our colleagues in other places. Luz had shared the Trends team email. You can reach them through this as well if you have specific things you'd like to pull, or there are some things that are not possible to do on the front-facing tool, but that the Trends team can do for you in the background. And then partnerships, right? You saw those cool post stories. Some of those searches were doable by you or me, and some of those might be helpful to have somebody from the Trends team work with you on that. So again, I'll also showcase that third URL, which Trina just put into the chat, g.co/news training. All of the tools that we talked about today are available to do your own training at your own pace at that site. And so I know we threw a lot at you today. I hope that it was inspiring and exciting and not overwhelming, but it's okay if it is. There's a lot that's possible. And so I think that news training site can also be really helpful to start to make sense of that, to really experience what those tools feel like, to work with them, and then start to think about how might I use these in my own work. Okay. Yeah. Do we have any questions?
I don't see questions, but I do have a question for you in regards to, in general, how journalists who are not familiar with all these Google News resources, are they able to train themselves without participating in a training session? Are they able to get to the resources and try to learn, directly through the instructions and the videos?
Yes, I think so. So the training that I mentioned at that training site is I've walked through a lot of it myself as I started this role. And so it's very step by step. And then it also is progressive, it builds, right? So you start with one basic skill and you'll move to the next one, and you'll have little quizzes along the way, which I hope doesn't sound intimidating, because it shouldn't feel like you're being graded at all. It's testing your knowledge. And then you can continue to sort of build on those skills. Additionally, I haven't done these yet myself because I'm relatively newer, but I know Loes has done some, and Trina. So on our YouTube site, which if one of my colleagues could paste that in the chat, that would be great. But the YouTube site for the Google News Initiative has a number of what we call GNI live trainings. And most everybody does them every month on the same topic, so you can get them in any language. And so those are live trainings done on YouTube, which of course you can watch the replay. And if you follow the teaching fellow for your region, we almost always tweet about them when we're about to do them as well, just to make sure that people can join us. So I think that's another great resource to watch those videos, watch somebody do it step by step. You could pause the video, you can work on it on your own screen.
For someone who is not familiar at all with any of these tools and of what you just presented, and we will talk further in the upcoming sessions, what are your suggestions where someone should start from? What is the number one, the basic, and then the second step level of knowledge?
I'll give my answer, and then I would love to open it up to my colleagues. And I also see a question that I think would be good for Trina in the chat, if you see that, Trina. So my thing that I think sort of gets you beyond just searching and into the next level would be Google Trends. I think once you learn how to use it, it's very accessible. I think you can get story ideas, as Loes shared, questions to ask people for interviews. I have a hack that my friend on the Trends team shared that can help you build an FAQ really nicely. Like what are the questions around this topic that people are asking? So I think Google Trends would be sort of like your next. It is accessible and easy to use, and you can go to the Explore is where you actually type in searches and compare them against each other. But they're the sort of homepage that I like to look at is just what's trending today. So you can just start to absorb what are people looking for and what's interesting in your part of the world. So that's my answer. But Loes, Trina, do you have what comes up for you guys first on that question?
I'll speak first. So basically, what I see is that the most crucial training that a lot of journalists would find very handy and helpful is on Google search operators. So I think that's also the most basic one that I feel that every single journalist need to be able to master and use. How to effectively report research stories using Google search operators. It really cuts down your time and increases efficiency. That's one. After you've mastered Google search operators, it would be helpful to know about how to use trends, Google alerts, pinpoint, and so forth. And then we sort of just move from there towards visualization like Flourish. And if you're interested in fact checking, then you will move on to the basics of fact checking. How do you do that? Reverse image search, reverse video search, geolocate place using Google Earth, Maps, Street View, and historical imagery. So I would say that's usually the process. We would recommend people to start off with search operators and then move on to trends, and then later on visualization and fact checking as well.
That's great. Yeah, it's really foundational. Trina, do you see the question about India in the chat?
Yes, so the question from Raj on how active is the Google Lab, News Lab in India for journalists, I would say it's very incredibly active. So News Lab has a partnership with Data Leads. I'm not sure if you've heard of Data Leads, but they are our trainers, external trainers in India, and they run trainings, I think, almost every month all across India. So they run it in multiple languages and different parts of India. And I think they've been very actively doing online training since last year. So if you have any inquiry for training, newsroom training, you can always email us at NewsLab support, and we'll definitely get back to you. And it will be very, very much likely that Data Leads will be doing the training.
Mm-hmm. I have a question. Given the fact that you have a great experience in journalism in different backgrounds, like in different cultural and media backgrounds, like from different countries, and now you are helping journalists as Google Labs Global Teaching Fellows in different regions. What would you answer to the question of what do you think are the greatest, the biggest, the most immediate needs that you feel the media industry in your region, in your country is facing, and how these needs are answered from your work of what you're doing as Global Teaching Fellows? Is it clear?
Loser Jose, do you want to take? Yes. Yeah. What are the needs in your region?
Mm-hmm.
Loser Jose, Trina and I just.
Yeah, and also from your experience.
I don't want to hog the mic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say that a big issue on journalism is to do the correct fact checking. It's a really important thing in the actual times. So it's challenging for us as journalists to do serious fact checking.
And I would like to also to say that the 4 pillars that the Google News Labs is based, if I could say, is the trust and fight against misinformation, the emerging technologies, the inclusive journalism, and the 4th is, what is the 4th, Mary?
I don't know. I'm actually not sure.
But the reason that I mentioned this is because what do you think is the biggest, the greatest priority? Do you think the greatest priority right now in the challenges that the journalism field is facing is how to become inclusive, how to fight misinformation, how journalists can learn how to use the emerging technologies? What personally do you think it is the #1 priority?
Mm-hmm. Luz, I saw that you unmuted. Do you want to chime in?
I think so it's difficult for me to kind of say definitely this is what publishers are after the most, but my kind of inkling from the training that I've given so far is what they appreciate the most is inspiration for new formats to use in the online realm. I mean, we've been digitally publishing for a few decades now, but I think a lot of publishers are still we're still reinventing constantly, what are the newest formats. We saw some 360 video was the big thing for some time, and now it's kind of dropping off. And I think a lot of publishers are constantly curious, from us to hear about what are the new upcoming formats and how can I start working with them without spending weeks and weeks and weeks of training, to make these cool productions. So that's my kind of 2 cents on that.
Yeah. One way, Thanos, to your question that I've thought about as I do set up and do trainings to bring some tools together is let the tools do the heavy lifting for you. And so I think that kind of ladders up to what I think might be my answer to your question, which is how can a journalist feel that they are creating something unique and doing stories that nobody else is doing, staying sustainable. And so I think that's where a lot of this stuff can be, like when time is the most precious resource and your own energy. So if a tool can do something for you like audio transcription, that then allows you to spend 2 hours doing something that only you can do because of your expertise and knowledge, that's where I think the biggest challenge is, and also where some of the solution toward that is. So how do we stay relevant and stay sustainable and do only the things that we can do, and how can tools help us do that?
Yeah. And the fourth element is, I just figured it out, it's local news, to support the local news industry.
Oh, thank you.
And the question also is, from your experience in different, especially from Latin America, for example, or in Europe or in Asia, do you think that there are local news media organizations, local media organizations that are a little bit hesitant to incorporate all these important elements and tools, and they are a little bit left on the traditional way of doing things in journalism, which is not effective and efficient anymore? Do you feel that there is some resistance or ignorance potentially? I would say, for example, from my experience in Greece, there is ignorance and there is resistance to modernize the newsroom and the newsrooms and the local news industry. Do you have the same feeling and the same sense from your experiences?
One way to share my answer to that question, and I've done a lot of training throughout my career in the newsrooms that I've been a part of, is I think about the bell curve, which you hear a lot about in teaching, right? So like you have a few at the front who are your high performers. You have a lot of people in the middle. Most people are here. And then you have a few people who might, as you say, either be resistant or maybe they're just not ready to learn. And so I've often thought about, how do we just move this whole thing forward, right? Let's give better tools to the people who are ready for them. Let's make sure everybody in the middle has what they need and slide that over. And then these folks will also come along, I think, by happenstance as well. And so I think it's a little bit about how can we just move that needle and give everybody what they need at their level to keep doing that good work.
Yeah. Thank you for your answer. I don't have other questions for the moment, but I look forward to our next session, Mary, on Pinpoint, August 11, right?
Yes. Yep. 1 p.m. Eastern.
And I want to thank you, all of you, Loes, Trina, Jose, Mary, for your time, for being with us here today. And certainly we look forward to have the next sessions with you guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Thanos, for making this happen. Thank you to my colleagues for doing this together, and for those who stay with us the whole time today and who will watch this on replay. I appreciate your attention, and I look forward to seeing you guys in about a month.
Thank you for your time and for your great work.